This episode of Performance Anxiety features violin virtuoso Rachel Barton Pine. From her debut with the Chicago Symphony at age 10 to playing in her own heavy metal band, she's had an amazing career. She's played with everyone from the Vienna Philharmonic to Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. We talk about everything from a violin that's older than America to finding the right bow for it, the accident that cost her leg to hanging backstage with Pantera. She's also instrumental, pun intended, in bringing to light hundreds of previously unknown or forgotten works from black composers. Follow her on social media at RBP Violinist. Follow us at Performance ANX. And don't forget to rate and review wherever you listen. Please enjoy this episode with Rachel Barton Pine.
Hi, this is violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and you're listening to Performance Anxiety.
I'm really excited about this. You're actually the first classical musician that I've had on the show, so I'm really excited about this. I don't usually get to go this route, so this is really cool.
Neat. Okay, it's kind of ironic that I'm on a podcast called Performance Anxiety because I actually don't have performance anxiety and never have.
Really?
Yeah.
Good gosh, you're like, I get it every time I do an interview.
Oh, well, I mean, I get it if I'm going to give a speech, but not if I'm going to play my violin.
Oh, that's that comfortable, huh?
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of thinking about it over the years, and I think there is a few factors. One is just, preparation. Like if you're really, really prepared, and you know that it's going to go well because, it's just in your automatic nervous system. Another is just the mindset, I guess, the perspective on what you're doing up there. And, if you feel like the audience is somehow a threat, then you get that whole fight or flight thing. But if you feel like you and the audience are in this together to experience this great music and you're both on the same side, then you're just kind of a conduit for the music. And it's not that they're judging you, it's that they're joining with you. And then, it's a whole different thing. And, and then just telling yourselves things like, if you make a mistake, it's not a life or death situation. So
that's a good point. Yeah. Now in the live realm, you don't get the luxury that I get is that I can edit out my mistakes. So
that's true. But sometimes that eliminates that adrenaline. Sometimes I prefer live, live radio, live whatever it is, because then you just go for it.
That's a good point.
Know it's being recorded, you're like analyzing yourself too much, and you actually might do worse.
That's a really good point. And I guess it helps if you've been playing your instrument for a long time.
Well, yeah, experience. That's the other thing, and just making sure that you're just up there so often that it becomes second nature. And I always tell young artists, students, that if they don't have many public performances that frequently, that they should find other opportunities to kind of get that jolt of adrenaline and get used to it. Even playing for a few friends that come over to hang out, or going to a retirement home, or whatever they can do to just be in front of people on a regular basis.
That's good advice. That's very good advice. So how long have you been playing the violin?
Well, I started when I was 3.5.
3.5? Wow.
It's pretty normal. And, it wasn't my parents' idea particularly. In fact, it was kind of the opposite of the ambitious, stage parents. They were like, don't you want to put that thing down and go ride your bike? But I saw some middle school age girls playing violin in my church, and I was just, really intrigued by the sound of the instrument. I begged my parents for lessons, and there was a teacher in walking distance that summer. So I started for fun, and then just absolutely fell in love with it and didn't want to do anything else. And by the time I was 5, I was self-identifying as a violinist. Like that was my whole, like reason for existence. And my parents were like, what is going on here? But when they did a little research and figured out you could earn your living playing the violin. So they're like, I guess we'll let her do this if she's that obsessed by it.
So, and now your daughter is also playing the violin, correct?
Yeah. So actually, I was thinking I might have her play cello because it would be like similar yet different. But then my husband pointed out that we didn't want to try to board an airplane with a cello every single week.
Oh,
so because she's been on the road with me since she was 3 weeks old, and now she's 7, and she still travels with me 100% of the time. And our nanny homeschools her as we travel around. And it's not really homeschool. It's like airplane school, backstage school, hotel school, and all of that. But,
oh my God.
yeah. So we ended up giving her a violin because it made more sense with our lifestyle. She couldn't really do piano because where's there going to be a piano in every town? And, so violin just seemed like the most logical thing. And I was a little worried because, I didn't set out to raise a carbon copy, but it turns out that she's a totally different personality than me. She loves music, but I was all about learning as many pieces as I could that had been composed by others throughout history. And Sylvia is all about her own melodies. Like she actually, when you say, "Are you a musician?" she'll say, "Yes, I'm a composer."
Oh,
and then
wow.
And then if you say, "Do you play an instrument?" she'll say, "Yes, I play the violin." But she doesn't identify as a violinist like I did. She identifies as a composer, and she just, has music pouring out of her own original stuff. So that's really interesting because that's like amazing. A totally different path than I was on. And just trying to do my best as a parent to nurture that within her. It's kind of exciting.
And your husband's not a musician, is that right?
No, he appreciates music, and he played a little violin in school, but he was a minor league pitcher, and then he started his own company.
Oh wow!
And he does computer stuff, so it worked out really great. Like when I was growing up, all through my teenage years into young adulthood, like the only question that I had was, which instrument will my future husband play? Like, it wasn't even a question of whether I would marry a musician. It was just, will it be a brass player? Will it be a pianist? Like, who's it going to be?
Oh, wow.
And then, I met my husband and I was like, oh, actually this could work. And it actually works brilliantly because if we were both musicians and I was off doing my concerts and he was off doing his concerts, I have so many colleagues who have to try to have a marriage over Skype. And it's really sad. Either that or they have to try to cut back on trying to go to each town for the minimum number of days. And my husband just brings his laptop and he's been on the road with me since 96, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And now he has a bunch of employees and a bunch of clients, but he makes it work. And it's just really great because it's like wherever we are, that's our home for the week.
That's fantastic.
Hotels are awesome. They change your sheets and they change your towels and they bring you room service. And why not?
Yeah. And if you get to the really nice ones, they put chocolate on your pillows.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I don't know. I'm just guessing on that one. Well, that's a very interesting lifestyle and one that I hear about. But you're also part of a heavy metal band. And do you find that touring for one or playing the audience and the lifestyle is different for each type of music?
Oh my gosh, totally. Yeah. So, oh gosh, where do I even start?
Oh, well, anywhere.
I mean, it was really funny when it was with my band. It was very humbling, because it kept my ego in check. Because I'd show up and they'd be like, "Who are you? What band are you with? Are you supposed to be here?" Instead of like, "Oh, hello, Ms. Pine. We're so honored by your presence. Let us lead you to your dressing room." Oh, wow. I remember the very first gig I played with my band, they asked, "What do you want in the dressing room?" And I guess the answer was supposed to be like, water, beer, whatever like that. And I was like, "Oh, well, just if you can just keep it simple. If you could just have maybe some hummus and crudités, that'd be perfect." And they looked at me like, they looked at me like I was making a joke. I was like, okay, we're in a very different world here.
Yeah.
Let me take a step back. Yeah, I always thought I'd have, different guy in each town. I should say that different. I always thought I'd have a guy in each town, and I do, but it's the same guy, which is even better.
There you go. But you didn't grow up listening to a lot of rock or any rock.
Well, since age 10. Okay. So I grew up with classical. My parents had it on in the car or in the home. Like it was classical, with the exception of Chicago blues.
Oh, okay.
They didn't play their old rock albums for me at the very young ages because, it's like anything. Like I don't play my favorite metal bands for my own daughter because it's like I don't have her watch an R-rated movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's great art, but she's too young.
There are elements that you probably don't want to expose. I've got 3 of my own, and there's certain things that I don't play for them.
It's not even about the lyrical content; it's just about the aggression and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but what's funny is she's actually jammed with me on some Black Sabbath medleys and stuff. And,
Oh, wow.
but it's different when you play it on violins.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll
This,
bet.
she's ready to rock out.
Oh,
But
man.
anyways, so my parents had their old blues records, and I felt like that was sort of in the air. Um, and that was, their favorite genre when they were a young, dating couple before I came along and spoiled their fun. Um, but then Santa Claus brought me my first transistor radio when I was 10, and I was scrolling up and down the dial, like discovering all kinds of stuff, 80s
Oh,
rap and pop and oldies and classic rock and just everything. And there was a station that came on at the end of the dial every night at 10 p.m. and it played, like the good stuff like Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, Pantera.
oh,
And I was
man.
just like, whoa. And it was just like really grabbed me. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered that all those bands are very classically influenced. And that's no doubt why I was so attracted to it, because it's actually like sophisticated and complex. But at the time, I just thought it was something that kind of an escapism where my brain wouldn't turn off when I listened to classical for pleasure. Like I couldn't just
Okay.
relax. Like if it was a piece I knew, I'd be thinking, oh, how are they interpreting that composition? And if it was a
Right.
piece I didn't know, I'd be analyzing it like, oh, how is that composition put together? And,
Oh, man.
with metal, I could somehow just turn off my brain and I wasn't thinking. Then I started playing it on the violin and it was all ruined. And I'd be like, oh, let's see. So there's the bridge and there's the chorus. And then the solo is like this and this and this. And then I was like thinking again.
Oh, yeah. So, so you started listening to all the old school thrash bands. Are you Camp Metallica, or are you more Camp Megadeth?
Oh, geez. Well, I have red hair. So what can I say?
Megadeth.
So, I'm Van Hagar. It's like whenever there's a redhead, Axel, whatever. I was like the only girl I knew. It's like I didn't want to like be with Axel. I wanted to be
Yeah.
Axel. Like it's just all about the red hair and getting up there and you know.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that being said, I mean, Desert Island Discs. I'd have to have like Puppets and Justice.
Yeah. Yeah. I can absolutely agree with you on that. I mean, I'm a big Megadeth fan myself. I was.
But I go see them any day over the other guys these days. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
totally.
Absolutely. I got a chance to see Megadeth once, and they opened up for Heaven and Hell with Ronnie James Dio, and when they
Ooh.
couldn't call themselves Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio anymore, so they toured as Heaven and Hell. That was a good show.
Oh, I can only imagine.
You mentioned listening to classical music. You would kind of take the pieces apart while you're listening, and you couldn't relax listening to it.
I mean, I would enjoy it, but I couldn't just, like
Yeah,
chill out at the end of the day. So
right.
ironically, I would like literally relax to thrash, which sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah,
but it was just like a chance to unwind and just like, let my brain turn off a little, which is not to say that it's like dumb, mindless music either,
right, right.
but yeah, it was just, and I don't know how to explain, but it was, yeah, that was the music that just felt like it was right for me. Still does.
Well, when you're playing live, how much interpretation can you give to the pieces that you're playing? I mean, how can you? How do you make it your own? Like you're
Yeah,
saying, somebody
that's a great,
interprets things.
yeah, that's a great question. So, a lot of people think that there's no element of improv in classical. Of course, that's not true for earlier classical music, like stuff from the 16 and 1700s, what we call the Baroque period. There are all of these, well, in R&B, you call it melismas, right? Where you have a simple melody and then you add all these extra notes,
Okay.
and we call it ornamentation. And you get to do that, either you work it out ahead of time, or once you get more used to the style, you can do it spontaneously and extemporaneously and just go with the flow. And, I guess maybe a closer example is jazz, where you add, you have a simple melody, but you're never supposed to play it bare because that would be tasteless. You're supposed to add stuff.
Right.
So in Baroque music, we add stuff. But ever since then, like the time of Mozart onwards, basically the last 200 plus years, the composers really have basically written out exactly what notes you're supposed to play. And you have to play exactly those notes. And if you skip a note or add a note, you're making a mistake. So does that feel constrictive? And the answer is no, because they're one of the interesting things that separates a lot of of classical from a lot of non-classical, whether you're talking about rock, pop, world music, folk music, traditional music, whatever. So many styles of music have a steady beat. They might change tempo from time to time, but they have a steady metronomic beat.
Right.
And so much classical music does not. It's like completely free flowing. And what you do with the timing is totally individual. And it's like poetry. It's like how you say the line, how you bring it to life and tell the story. And it's all based on emotions. And so you definitely experiment in the practice room. You figure it out. You read about the performance traditions, listen to artists of the past, study the score, read about the history of the time and place the composer came from, all that background stuff. But then when you're on stage, there's just a whole element of inspiration with the acoustics of that hall and the vibe of that audience and the other musicians you're playing with. And a lot of it is very, very spontaneous. And that's our improvisation, is how we play the notes. And it can be different every time, and it makes it super fun. Of course, on a recording, you can play it over and over until it's perfect and you capture your vision.
Right.
But and you can never do it that perfect on stage. But on stage, you can actually go beyond your vision and suddenly have an inspiration for something, because you're in that moment that you would have never figured out in the practice room, but there it is happening.
Okay. Well, that's
so it's really magical.
That's absolutely fascinating. And you've mentioned before, I read and I've listened to some interviews, and you've mentioned that people who listen to hard rock should definitely give classical music more of a chance, because a lot of these bands, like you said earlier, are influenced definitely by classical music. You've played rock in a classical style with the violin. How difficult is it to arrange that type of music into something that can be played on the violin?
Oh, not hard at all. In fact, I have a podcast called Violin Adventures, and I have an entire episode about how to make your own string arrangement of a rock song, and I take you through the whole step-by-step process.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really very straightforward. I mean, some things you have to keep in mind if you're not playing with drums, but you need a beat. Then you have to either have like a sequence of accents that you do with the way that you play the bass line, you're not really playing it as a bass line. You're kind of using those pitches, but using it, sort of as a rhythm section, or you even have to add rhythms. Well, a good example is Black Sabbath's song Black Sabbath, where the actual notes are going boom, boom, brrr, right? But the drum is going boom, 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 boom. So, what are you going to do? You're not going to like hit your bow on your cello and make a crash, right? So, but playing it without that beat, it would be totally lacking in something. So what we do is we combine it. So we're actually using the pitches of the notes, but then the rhythm of the drum beat. So you go bum, 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 on the cello. And that way you can have that element. And then it's also a question of, what tempo works. Because sometimes in order to retain the spirit of the song, you don't want to do an exact replica. You don't want to have the same BPM as, the commercial recording. Of course, sometimes the bands themselves don't even perform it at the same tempo that's on their album. So it's interesting to listen to live concerts on YouTube or something and figure out how close to their album the band themselves are. You can also kind of figure out from that whether the solos are more like composed solos or improv solos. And if they're more like composed solos, then you might, have more of a likelihood to do that same solo. Whereas if it's an improv, so, if they play a different solo every night, then people know the one from the album. But if the band doesn't ever play that one, why should you? Then you have the freedom to maybe just blow your own solo. And of course, without lyrics, and you get to verse 5 and it's the same darn notes, you're not doing lyrics. What's the point? So sometimes I shave a few verses. So there's like a lot of tricks and I feel like actually you're honoring the originals more by making these modifications because you're retaining the spirit, whereas by trying to do some kind of a carbon copy, you might actually be less effective and therefore less true to the spirit of the song. So that's just some of the things. Sometimes I change the octaves. Sometimes I have one instrument or another instrument, switch roles, all kinds of fun stuff.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. Now, I've got a question. I thought about this today. When when you're listening to, I know you like Led Zeppelin. I've discovered that through some of your interviews and
honestly, I think that goes back to my roots in the Chicago blues. I mean, I appreciate their psychedelic stuff. I know that's actually probably their more important stuff, but I kind of just like their cheesy testosterone fueled, blues, like extravaganzas, it's just like, okay. I don't know. It's just fun.
Well, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. How is Jimmy Page's bow technique on Dazed and Confused?
Ha! Oh, well, I got to play with those guys in '96 when they were doing the Page and Plant tour.
Oh, man.
If you go to my old Flickr, you can see me with Jimmy and Robert, and I was like, great moment of my life.
That's amazing.
But I asked Jimmy, why don't you play with a violin bow anymore? And he was like, oh, it's just too hard. Which I get, because it is hard.
Yeah.
I saw this great cover band. They're all women. I don't know what their orientation is, but of course they call themselves Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
Because, how could you not, right?
Yes.
But they were killer, and the front woman was Liz. How do you even pronounce that word? Lithe.
Yeah.
And then the drummer looked like Jabba the Hutt, and they were awesome. But they were using a violin. The guitarist was using a violin bow and tearing it up, and she was like Jimmy Page in his youth, that was pretty amazing. Oh. Actually, my favorite Led Zeppelin singer these days is Ann Wilson. Is it Ann? God, Ann, right?
Nancy, the guitarist.
Ann Wilson. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I just love hearing her sing those old songs.
Yeah, I mean, and she's been singing that powerfully for decades. I
know. Well, there's so few. It's every time I think I like a female vocalist, they get girly on me. Yeah. You've got the ones who are going so extreme, they're just doing the growls. But I just love a singer like Ann Wilson, and there just aren't enough of them out there, It's really something special. Yeah,
I agree, because she's so good. I'm not thinking, it doesn't matter to me that whether she's male, female, she's male. That's a weird sentence. But it doesn't matter.
Well, that's the thing. She's just a rock singer.
Yeah. Yeah, and her voice is incredible. I don't know that I hear so many people, so many singers who you can tell that their voices are degrading over the years, and her voice just seems at least as powerful as it was back in the 70s. I don't know. It's unbelievable.
You don't know what's genetics and what's like maybe she does the right warm-ups, or maybe she did less bad things to herself. Or...
That's a little less self-indulgence than Robert, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But, I actually want to go back to something you were saying earlier about classical and rock, though, because we all know that there's a million sub-genres and sub-genres of rock, right?
Oh, God,
all these narrow delineations, and you have, even death metal is now a category, and there's this kind of death metal and that kind of death metal. And that's a category. And so, classical, we think of it as one thing, but it actually goes for hundreds and hundreds of years as opposed to just a few decades. And so it's kind of crazy that it's all lumped together, because it's so diverse and so widespread. And, you don't expect any one person to like all of rock, right?
Right.
I mean, the person listening to some kind of mellow 70s stuff is not also going to, hear Dillinger Escape Plan or vice versa. Or maybe they are, but maybe they don't like something. He's somebody who listens to some Baroque music in a movie soundtrack and thinks, oh, that doesn't do it for me. Maybe they haven't heard a Mahler symphony, or maybe they haven't heard a Brahms violin concerto. And I just feel and especially for metal fans who are used to that drama, the whole Iron Maiden, operatic thing, the intensity. I feel there's so much classical music out there that really nails that. And a lot of times it's not the classical you hear, because you hear the more mellow stuff when you're in the dentist's waiting room or a hotel lobby or something, or whatever they put on in a restaurant. And, they're not going to put the bombastic, just like they're not going to, except for a couple of great burger joints. I can't think of any restaurant I've ever been in where they were blasting the Anthrax. Well, so it's the same thing, and so people think they know what classical is, and they think that it's not really that great because they haven't heard the other stuff.
If you were trying to introduce somebody who's a big fan of Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, the classic metal bands, Anthrax, who would be a good composer to introduce them into the classical world?
Shostakovich for sure.
Okay.
He was a 20th century Soviet Russian composer. His music was like, I don't know if you call it protest music. It was like, railing against, the atrocities of humanity. And it's just so dark and deep and just blows your mind. There's actually a Facebook page called I Headbang to Shostakovich. And everybody posts their favorite moments from all his stuff.
Oh, wow.
But Shostakovich Symphony No. 5 would be a great one to check out.
Ooh, all right. I'm gonna write that down. Because I'm exactly where you said most people are, where I don't know the different types of classical music. I know what I like, but I couldn't tell you what type it is. I'm not that knowledgeable on it, but I'd like to get a lot more knowledgeable on it. So I definitely have some homework to do. Yeah,
it's too bad there aren't more websites discovering classical music for people that are coming from other kinds of music or something like that.
There's a ton of stuff for rock. Like if you're looking if you like Queens of the Stone Age and you want to find something that sounds like them, there's websites for that. There should definitely be one for classical. Yeah, and I think it's just such a, there's just so much stuff. It's like, where do you even start? But the nice thing is you can go to the internet and try stuff out and figure it out. And, I think the one sticking point is, I've met so many people who love classical and have found their niche, and, they like Stravinsky Rite of Spring, or they like, Beethoven's Symphony No. 7. They like, some of this stuff, but then the idea of going to a live concert, there's a lot of misperceptions about what that atmosphere is. Okay. People worry that it's going to be like the country club. You have to wear a suit and tie. You have to be polite, and maybe it's going to be a bunch of snobby people there. And that's and that's totally not true these days. But, I think people are a little intimidated, like they won't know how to behave or things like that. The funny thing is it's the opposite too. I had friends classical friends who would listen to my band's album and be like, oh man, I'd love to catch one of your live shows, but I've never been to one of those metal clubs before. Isn't that going to be a bunch of scary tattooed people crashing into each other? And I'm like, no, metal fans have office jobs and go to a metal concert on the weekend. They look like you. There's nothing scary about. I mean, you did have the tattooed people too. But, it wasn't just they were gonna hurt you or something. Yeah, we've grown up. We had to get real jobs. So it's funny how people just have these stereotypes in their mind, and then are afraid to take a risk, and so. I always try to be like, hey, I'm a metal fan and I love classical, and you can totally go check out a classical show and it's going to be awesome. Oh, yeah. I'm definitely gotten more into it with my kids being more into classical music and doing the marching band. I've actually learned a lot through that. So I'm trying to get that. That stuff blows my mind. All that choreography. Oh my gosh. And I can play a whole bunch of notes, but I don't want to have to think, okay, turn right and then walk around in a circle and oh my gosh, no way. Oh, it's crazy. And my kids are 2/3 of them are in high school. The youngest one's in middle school, and they're all going to be in marching band, and I'll have 3 of them on the football field next year doing it. And it's to watch my son. It's funny because he's taller than me now, but he's so scrawny. But he carries this big sousaphone all over the football field, and he's just sitting there spinning and turning and twisting. And I don't know. I swear the stamina of those kids and counting off their steps, and it's incredible. It really blows me away. Well, it's definitely a young person's sport. You can get great musicians in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but you don't see any 6-year-olds doing marching band. That's true. Although concert band, yes, but not marching band. I'll tell you what, I might pay to see that though. I would definitely. Actually, that'd make a fun reality show, wouldn't it? It would be great. I don't know where you would pull these people from, but that would be fantastic. So I have a question for you. I have read some bios of some classical musicians and all, but a lot of times what's almost more interesting is the instruments that they play. And you have a very old, very valuable violin. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to play it and a little bit about its history?
Yeah, so basically, unfortunately, a lot of these antique instruments are owned by collectors who've bought them as investments. They're not very liquid, meaning if you own one, you can't just turn around and sell it tomorrow like you can with a stock. But
True.
It's very secure, meaning that it's never going to go down in value. In 100 years, antique string instruments have never gone down in value.
Wow.
So for people who are super wealthy and, just want to like diversify their portfolio, they will buy instruments because they know it's actually a good investment. And the problem with that is that over a number of decades, the price of these things has risen and risen and risen. And it's not like visual art where, okay, one person owns it, they hang it in their home, they and their friends look at it, that's nice. Right. You own a violin, you don't play it, and it's like sitting there like a piece of wood. What's the point?
Yeah.
It's not meant to be an object of visual art. It's meant to be a living voice. And so luckily enough of these patrons realize that it's better for everybody for these instruments to be heard. It's definitely generous, but it's not mere altruism, because actually it's better for the owner for the instrument to be played. First of all, the recipient pays the annual insurance. And believe me, that's a chunk of change. Actually, they have one less bill to pay because I'm paying that bill. But then also, a lot of an instrument's value has to do with its history. It's not just how beautiful it sounds and the fame of the maker and the condition of how good shape it's in, but it's also about the history. Okay. And so if an instrument is out there in the world, in the media, doing recordings, doing performances, etc., it's adding to its legacy, and that also increases its value. And also, certain things need to be like locked away in a museum in order to be preserved so they don't get used up, right?
Right.
But violins actually are healthier if they're being vibrated. If they sit around not being vibrated, their voice kind of goes dead, and then you have to really work to wake it back up.
Oh, really?
And so it's actually a lot better for them to be out there being played. It's like, certain mechanical things where they need, the gears need to run. They can't just like sit there rusting, right? So, or if you think about if you didn't talk for 10 years, you'd sound a little croaky at the end.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the governments will actually own some important instruments and then loan them to the best players of that country to represent them in the world. Or in Asia, sometimes they're owned by corporations who loan them to young artists as a patriotic duty. And here in the U.S., with our capitalist system, we rely just on individuals, and you just kind of, it's a small world. You make connections, performers, there's only a certain number of us at this level, and then there's the patrons, and you meet them and get to know them. And, if you're lucky, a match is made and somebody loans you an instrument. So I'm incredibly grateful for this particular one. It was made the same year by the same maker as Paganini's violin. So it's a 1742 Guarneri del Gesù from Cremona, Italy. So, 1742, before America was a country. And basically, it has a really cool history. So it was the concert instrument of one of the great Italian virtuosos right after Paganini in the first part of the 1800s. And then in the late 1800s, it was the concert instrument of a woman violin soloist, Marie Soldat, who was a protege of Brahms. And Brahms himself chose this instrument for her.
Wow.
He, of course, was a pianist. That was his instrument. And he would play chamber music together, like small ensemble stuff. And so my violin actually got to jam with Brahms in like trios and quartets.
Jeez.
Even duets. And
that's incredible.
It really is. And of course, I was the first person to ever play thrash on it.
Yeah.
But when I play Brahms, it's really like just perfect for that music. And it does so well with all of the 19th century big, fat, romantic concertos. And I mean, it sounds great with anything. One of the best descriptions, like people say, well, why are these old instruments better than new instruments? And it's not that they're better, but they do become more complex with age, like a fine wine.
Okay.
And, like new instruments, their colors are every bit as gorgeous as old instruments. I mean, the best new ones.
Right.
But there just aren't as many. And so it's like painting with a Crayola box of 24 instead of like millions of Pantones in every possible shade. And so a violin like this, it can do anything I can imagine And then it even like shows me what's in it and inspires me to think of things I wouldn't have otherwise. And it's just like this, it's almost like this symbiotic relationship where it's responding to me, but I'm also responding to it. And it's really kind of almost like a living partner in the music making.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Are there antique bows that go along with the antique violins?
That's a great question. The bow actually, it's not just like any, you don't just pick up any old guitar pick and, one is as good as another. Like bows actually are a very specific thing. First of all, they're made out of, whereas violins are made out of spruce and maple with a bit of ebony thrown in, bows are made out of Pernambuco wood, which you've probably never even heard of. It's a particular tree that only comes from Brazil, and now it's very rare. And it has the combination of strength and flexibility, which works best for violin bows of any tree on the planet.
Oh, wow.
And it's really such an individual thing. Like most violins ergonomically feel fine. Like, it's a matter of personal taste if you like the voice of that violin.
Yeah.
But in terms of just physically being able to play it, like most people can play most violins, it's not a big deal. But bows, like one thing that feels really responsive in one person's hand can feel awkward in another person's hand, which is really uncanny. You have to find a bow that feels right to you. And then it has to be a three-way match because it's like you find a guitar you like, and then you have to like try all the different brands of amps, and the brand that works well for that guitar might not be the same brand that worked well for your last guitar, and all of that. And so it's like with the bow, it's not that the bow has tone, but different bows draw different tone out of the same violin. In fact, students always make the mistake, like if they have, let's say an $8,000 violin and a $500 bow. Some kind of low-end stuff. Then they might be like, oh, I've got a few extra grand. I'm going to upgrade to a $12,000 violin. It's like they would be better off upgrading from a $500 bow to a $2,500 bow, because then that $8,000 violin they already have is probably going to sound so much better, and there's going to be so much more you can get out of the violin you've already got. So finding the right bow is really critical. And actually, I tried hundreds of bows to find the one that was right for this 1742 Guarneri.
Really?
And far more bows, than the number of guys I had to date to find my husband.
Well, that's good. I think very good.
It was a much more problematic search.
It was hard to find the bow, huh?